I'm Ken Kazmerski, and I came to Orlando in 1980, January. Came out of the closet in 1985, 5 years after coming here, and then began to get active in the gay community. And it was not until 1994, however, that I got involved with the Gay and Lesbian Bisexual Student Union, which was not known as that at that time. At that time, it was the Gay Student Association of UCF. And as a result of my becoming the faculty advisor for GLBSU, I became involved in with other organizations, gay organizations here in the Orlando area. And it was also as a result of that that I got involved with the History Project. And if you want me to elaborate on that one, I certainly will. The GLBSU was not GLBSU, first of all. And second, I think it was the summer of 93. It could have been the summer of 94. Students in my class, a student in my class, a lesbian, an out lesbian, had invited me to a concert on campus. It was the Village People. And I went there with other friends, but met up with my student. And after that, it wasn't too long that she asked me if I'd be interested in being an advisor to the gay student group on campus. And that's how I got involved. I agreed. I was out on campus since 1985, and this was 1993 or 94 that she approached me. So as a faculty member and a member of the administration, I was known already to be out. I was known for teaching content on GLBT issues, and in fact had begun to design a course on social work with gays and lesbians. I never did finish that because I retired before I could get it done. The History Project was probably the brainchild of Debbie Simmons, who headed up the Metropolitan Business Association, the Gay Community or Community Chamber of Commerce. And I'm not sure why, but here's what was happening. National Coming Out Day, which is when Come Out with Pride occurs now, had been, if you can say owned, was, quote, owned by GLBSU of UCF. Now, whoever had the idea for Come Out with Pride knew that and invited GLBSU to jointly sponsor Come Out with Pride. Come Out with Pride decided to have it at Heritage Square, which is right by the History Museum, the County History Museum in Orlando. Now, I don't know this, but Debbie would know this. She denies this, but I suspect that that there was some agreement to have something within the museum as well as outside the museum. I think either Debbie wanted that to occur or the museum, who had control over Heritage Park, wanted that to occur. I'm not sure who was responsible. So Debbie gets on the phone. She calls several people, including Patty Sheehan, Phyllis Murphy, Mary, I don't remember Mary's last name, Brooks, and me, to kind of think about putting on a history exhibit at the museum as part of Come Out with Pride. That's how it started. Now, we only, mind you, had 6 or 7 weeks to do this in. we met at, we didn't have an office, obviously. We didn't have anything. We didn't have a telephone. We didn't have an address. We didn't have anything. But we met at Debbie's print shop in downtown, well, close to the center. And there we talked about what we might do. Well, with so little time, we couldn't find material for blowing up posters. We didn't have a budget. So what we did do is I went back to my GLBSU group and said, let's pull something together and give me some pictures. So we created a couple of 3 maybe collages about UCF's GLBSU and put them on tripods. Debbie did the same with MBA. She created collages of the history and important events in MBA's existence. I called Joy Metropolitan Community Church and spoke with the pastor and was able to get them to help me to pull a collage together of Joy MCC. And then Phyllis and Mary, who are partners, decided they would do one on the Pride parades, which they had been spearheading in the past. So we had 4 groups of collages on those 4 topics. That was the first exhibit. It was pretty rinky-dink, but it was good because it called attention to an idea called the History Project, the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender History Project. The second year, we had time. We had a whole year to get things together. We blew up pictures into posters. We wrote captions for different posters. We got a budget for the first time. We still met, I think, in Debbie's print shop. And we had big banners that went in the museum from the second floor almost down to the first floor. It was beautiful, and the museum was so proud of that second exhibit. They wanted us back, but Come Out With Pride decided to move its location to Lake Eola because they had outgrown Heritage Park already. So therefore, we moved down to Come Out With Pride. We moved with them to Lake Eola. Lake Eola was a great place, and the attendance there was fantastic, and we got all kinds of people to come through our exhibit. But our exhibit was not really there. Our exhibit at Lake Eola was in a round tent, kind of like a circus tent, but much smaller. It was pretty. But we had to share it with music, and we didn't like that. The History Project did not like that. And Debbie had stepped out of it, by the way, by then, and I was chairing it from the second year on. And my group really did not want to do it there, since we had to share it with tables for music and drinking and everything. It was not a museum setting. So we decided to have a month-long exhibit at the center, the GLBT Center. And we had it upstairs because we couldn't get the downstairs. There was too many things going on, too many things planned, scheduled. So we put on a major month-long exhibit. I think it ended up being 3 weeks, but we called it a month-long exhibit. And it was very nice and well received. But here we didn't get as much, I mean, at the center, we didn't get as much attendance, of course, as we would at the Come Out With Pride celebration. So we moved it back the following year. We spoke with Come Out With Pride. They got a donation, I believe, from Darden. We got a tent, and it was a good-sized tent. It was air-conditioned. We insisted on that. And so Darden really sponsored that through Come Out With Pride. And it was viewed by, 30,000 people. I think we had to even count the number going through, and we only had 1,000 stickers to put on people. When they ran out, we knew we had 1,000. There were, a heck of a lot more people coming through it after that, so we don't know how many. But then the following year we did it again at Lake Eola in another air-conditioned tent. But this year, we are now a museum, and we are going to have a tent again at Come Out with Pride because so many people then get to see it. But we're also going to have a month-long exhibit at the City Art Factory on Orlando Avenue in downtown Orlando. So it's moved from a small project to a major. I think it's a major. It's no longer a museum. It's a virtual museum, and it's a mobile museum right now.
I came out actually right after high school, about I'd say 80, 82, 83, somewhere around there, to my family. Was raised very traditional Catholic. It wasn't very easy. My mother didn't take it well, let's put it that way, even though my mother was divorced and I was raised by a single mom. She thought that was going to be a very, very hard path for him, of her kind of admonishing me and telling me, you've chosen a very hard life for yourself, and even though you're my child, I don't want you teaching, because I was, at the time I was in school to become a teacher. I don't want you teaching. I don't want you around kids. I don't want you exposing children to this. It was, even though it was, she accepted me, it was still with a lot of caveats, a lot of conditions that she kind of put on it. So it was kind of a tough time for me. And it was an interesting time in the gay community. I mean, it's not like now where you have internet, you have ways to kind of connect with other people. The only way we really got to know what was going on was we had papers that were in the bars, newsletters and things like that. There was actually a bookshop called Out and About Books, where Bruce Graham would let us put a lot of things out in his store. Chevis Chaffee owned a place called the Powerhouse. It was a little restaurant in downtown Winter Park. And we put a lot of literature out there and stuff like that. And because Chevis was such a great activist, he had actually come from Iran, where he had been under death threats and things like that for writing school papers on being gay. He got political asylum here, and he actually used to have a lot of demonstrations and actions in Winter Park. And they weren't like angry things; they were just awareness kind of things. And at the time, there used to be more of the Ku Klux Klan and people like that than there were of us. It was a very small group that used to come out to do these kinds of things. So I went from being very closeted and very Catholic and very afraid of who I was over the course of time to actually participating in these political things. I was involved with LCN Express for many, many years, probably about 10 years. Went to the March on Washington with that group. We had a busload of, we took a bus one time, and then we actually took a train another time. It was a lot of fun. We drove all night and then got to Washington, D.C. We had a little flag corps that we did. I had written a song called Forward Never Strike that we sang during the parade. I actually painted the banner that we carried in the parade in '87. I mean, that was a lot of fun. I was involved with Orlando Regional Pride from 1991 to 1996, and the Pride Parade had started a couple of years before. I had actually gotten involved because I was still living in Volusia County at that time. I lived in Deltona. I was secretary and in charge of fundraising and stuff like that. And we had actually started off at Lake Eola Park. Kind of got kicked out of Lake Eola Park because we had a homophobic park manager at the time that made up all these trumped up charges, and he double booked the band show on us. And we actually had to move the parade to City Hall in 1996. And that was the first time we had it here. We had our first we had our first elected official. She wasn't gay, she was just gay friendly because she has two gay sons. Betty Carter actually was in the parade, and it was the first year we got death threats as a result, because we were starting to kind of get mainstream people to pay attention to us. And I was actually the keynote speaker that year, and we had to meet with the police department because of the death threats, and they basically told me, keep it short and keep moving. If you can imagine, that was the advice from the Orlando Police Department: keep it short and keep moving. If you could only imagine, in other words, give them a moving target. So it was kind of crazy. The funny thing was, in Watermark, they said I was bizarre and I kept moving around, and they didn't understand why. And it was because, there was a sniper threat, and I was trying not to get shot. So Sometimes if you don't understand what someone's going through, you might want to ask before you criticize them in the paper because, hey, I mean, there's a legitimate reason why I kept my remarks short and why I kept moving. Um, so I was involved with the parade for 5 years. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. We called it Orlando Regional Pride because we used to pull from people in Brevard, Seminole, Osceola. It was kind of like a huge regional gathering. It was before there was a lot of other things going on in other parts of the state, and everybody used to come here. Over time, it's changed. Different people have taken it over and stuff like that. There was only 1 year, though, since I think, I want to say the first one was in 1989, but there's only been 1 year where we really haven't had a parade. So that's kind of cool. And the thing about the parade, though, it was to try to get people to be visible. Because like I said, when I first started out, in 84 and 85, nobody was willing to come out. Everybody was very, very afraid about losing their jobs. If you were professional, you didn't. I think a lot of people, I'm going to be 50 this year. A lot of people in my age group, said, oh, we can't be out. I mean, they were very, very fearful of being out. And I think the thing about the parade was it gave people an opportunity to be who they are, be comfortable, and realize there's other people like me. And that's kind of what it really was about. And I was also involved during that time, about 1995 to 2000, with the Rainbow Democratic Club. And we just went out and started registering people to vote. We go out to bars, we go out to community events, we go out to the Pride Parade. And we actually kind of started keeping track of who was gay and what neighborhoods they lived in and stuff like that. And it kind of gave us an idea of where we could have an impact in terms of candidates. And then we would just do mailers out to people, encourage them to vote. We had really good turnouts, but the few people that we actually, hundreds of people that we had registered that we knew were either gay or gay friendly because they were at gay events, to get them to get out and get out to vote. I think in the first Clinton campaign, I think we had like an 80% turnout of the people that we had registered to vote. So that was a really good thing. So we had finally had some success in making political activity a little bit more palatable for people. I guess kind of by making it fun and by making it a part of the parade and explaining to people why they need to vote. Have the political speakers like Keith Meinhold have been kicked out of the military, for Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Having them tell their personal stories and understanding why it was so important to come out and how it could have an impact on their community.
I was executive director of the Hope and Help Center, and that's not specifically GLBT, but a lot of people equate AIDS and GLBT as a unity, at least. I was moving here from Iowa. I didn't have a job, but I had a phone interview with Hope and Help before I moved down here, and then I moved down here, and 2 days later they had an interview with me, the whole board and me, and talked about it, and later that afternoon they offered me the position of executive director. So on my day one, I started and found out that they had 5 bank accounts, and they all had the same account balance, 0. And they were waiting for a check to come in to make payroll. And I went, oh my, what did I sign up for? But I knew that they were having some difficulties, and their previous executive director, Chuck Hummer, unfortunately had passed away 6 months before that, and the interim executive director, John Serra, was ill himself, and so would only come in like a couple of days a week, and so it was just helping out where he could, but really for 6 months they hadn't had a leader. And so one of the main things I needed to do was to do some organizational development type changes. A lot of their money came from a federal grant from the Ryan White Fund, and they weren't getting a lot of that money or weren't maximizing the money because they didn't have people showing up to work 40 hours a week because there was no boss, no one telling them what to do. Suddenly I come in, do attendance policy, make everybody work 40 hours a week. We could get reimbursed from the grant, and suddenly our cash flow problems were solved. And then the next big things I needed to do was to diversify their funding stream so that they weren't 100% reliant on federal funding. And they had a headdress ball, was their main fundraiser, and the year before they had made $70,000 and netted 19, which, if you know anything about fundraising, it's really high fundraising expense. So one of the things I did is revamped it, did corporate sponsorships, etc., and brought in other people. Instead of charging $75 per ticket, we charged $500 a ticket. And the people wrote off the check exactly the same. And then in the first year, we generated $180,000 and netted $100,000. Still too high fundraising expense, but at least the net was enough where it could help our organization. And then the other big thing that I did for them was I asked, well, when is the AIDS walk? And they said, well, we don't have an AIDS walk. And I said, Orlando, 1.7 million people, you don't have an AIDS walk? So I organized an AIDS walk for them. So, and had 1,000 walkers that walked on International Drive. We closed half of International Drive down. So the other half was two-way traffic, and the other half we walked from the Mercado down Universal Boulevard, which used to be called Republic, but they changed the names all the time. And then came back up and had a party there that day, and it was a great success. Made $48,000 for the Hope and Help Center, and I was with them for a year. When I left them, they had $250,000 in reserves. Everybody had received salary increases, and we were helping 25% more clients.
And then, so the art scene's bad enough, but then if you try to put in something gay, there's certainly some resistance. So you have to do it. You have to do it really tastefully and slowly. And my artwork is not overtly gay. I mean, certainly not most of it is not overtly gay. There's lots of. I'm a figurative painter, so there's lots of figures, but I do just as many females as I do males. One time, we have something called Nude Night in Orlando, and this woman, Kelly Stevens, started a couple of years ago. Well, actually, she didn't start; she inherited it from somebody else, but she really took off with it. Where once a year in February, she rents out a vacant space for 2 or 3 nights, and has a call to artists, where artists from all over Central Florida put up paintings, and you submit them, and they choose them or they don't choose them, and it has to be nude related. And so when I discovered that, I was very happy, because finally I had an outlet that worked for me, and I was very lucky. I gotten into just about every show that I've ever tried to get into there, and that was, I think, one of the first time where I saw the art community comfortable with the nudity thing. It wasn't the museum people, but it was another kind of art community. Unfortunately, as will happen, people will drink and do stupid things, and there were part of the art was not just art on the walls. There were art installations. There were live models, painted nude models walking around, and there was a table of fruit with a nude woman in it, and she was covered with chocolate, and you were supposed to, get your chocolate kind of thing. Well, certain men got drunk and did things they weren't supposed to do, and so we had to take her off the table, and just stuff like that. It just always seemed to get out of hand because people can't respect that sort of thing. But Kelly was always very comfortable with the gay thing. I think the first painting I ever had in there was 3 naked men together, huge 50 by 50 painting that sold. And maybe that's why she was comfortable with it, because it sold. But and she's continued to do that, and I enter her shows pretty frequently. But that's really about the only, that and the Gay and Lesbian Community Center, that's really the only place you can show anything overtly gay. I've had a show at Gallery at Avalon Island, and I mean, it took me 10 years to establish that in the art community here, that you could trust that I wasn't going to do something stupid. The blood work thing, people just love that. I don't know what it is about that, but that's the thing that I sell the most of. I'm running out of blood. So Gallery at Avalon Island is probably the best gallery that we have now, and so I had a show there last year, a pretty big show, and there were lots of probably about a dozen blood work paintings, and so I'm openly gay, and everybody knows I'm gay. Everybody knows my partner. Everybody knows I'm HIV positive. Everybody knows I'm an artist, but I also have this other life as a social worker. I'll talk about that in a little while. And so over time, Quack sort of infiltrated and got everybody comfortable with it. And so I don't sense any homophobia in the Orlando scene, art scene anymore. Everybody's very comfortable with it. Certainly, they're certainly your holdouts. But for what scene there is, I think most people I never have a problem. Most people are very comfortable with me, and they know I'm gay, and they're cool with the HIV thing.
It was about the time, it was right after the mayor of San Francisco started allowing gay marriages. And there was the great hue and cry. And, of course, the whole issue of gay marriage was on the radar, but that was like a real catalyst for action. And I woke up one morning and thought, I've got to do something. And I didn't go through the usual channels that normally probably I should have gone to the board first. I just felt a sense of urgency. So I did a sermon, I think it was the first week in March. It could have been a week earlier, right around then. It was right after, post Valentine's Day, when there are some kinds of witnesses. And at the end of it, I asked anyone, actually what I said was, if there's anyone that's thinking about having a commitment ceremony, I would like to do a public witness. And I had a vision for it. And in response, one woman raised her hand and asked another woman if she'd marry her. It was quite a moment. She said yes. And I asked everyone that was interested in participating in some way or another to meet with me after the service. And so at that time, the couples, including the president of the church, who she and her partner had reason not to be public, but decided they were going to do it. 3 couples decided to stand in public witness and have me marry them. But my idea was that I would not just officiate at a wedding for GL folks, but also it would be a vow renewal for straight couples. And that was the piece that I think was a little different about what we did. And within about 2.5 weeks, we pulled it all together. I went to the, whatever it is, parks, and took out reserved the small pavilion at Lake Eola, saying I was going to do a wedding. Got the permit. Teams got together. We all knew we had to keep it totally secret because we did not want the event to be utterly marred by protest. And we managed to do that until the night before. But we did let one interviewer, one person from the Sentinel, came to our last planning meeting and followed us along and did the story, Kate Santich. And somebody from MFE, I think, did a brief interview because they stood outside. There wasn't anything we could do. It was pretty obvious our cover had blown. But essentially what happened was, the morning, I think it was March 19th, it was the Friday before like spring break or something, and so we scheduled it for noon, figuring that people in the church who might be able to get off work during the lunch hour Anyway, about I'm trying to remember. I think 6 or 7 couples, including there were about, I think there were seven or so of us, including those of us who'd already had ceremonies, but were going to do the renewal, who were same-sex couples. We all went down to City Hall and applied for marriage licenses. Of course, by then the cameras were on us. We came outside, we sang a song that had been written by one of the couples in the church. And then we walked over to Lake Eola, where other members of the church had everything ready. And the 3 couples were married with a beautiful banner. Orlando Gay Chorus sang, and lots of people from the church came and supported us, as actually did a few of my colleagues, including our district executive. And a colleague came from Tampa. So a few people came to bear witness with us and knew what we were doing. And I think about 9 or 10, just under a dozen heterosexual couples also went through the vow renewal. So they processed in, and people had made boutonnieres and flowers, and then we went back to church and had a full reception that the church put together. And the only protester was good old John Butler Book in a lavender, because I'll never forget that, a lavender sports coat. But that was it. It's the only protest. So that was, I'd like to think it was an important event for the church as well as the 3 couples. And certainly the president, and if I may tell a story, who was just incredibly adorable about the whole thing. Getting her special haircut and special clothes. I mean, it was a wedding. It was a wedding. It was very moving. But Joan and Yvonne were not, that was not their ceremony. And, another thing I want to say about that, because this is really important, there were a few couples who agonized, same-sex couples. It still is heartbreaking to me, and decided they couldn't risk it, they couldn't do it. And this is whatever, what is this, maybe 1990? 2000, what? 2004, maybe?
So when I first went to UCF, I think it was maybe the summer or fall of '93, and I really didn't pay too much attention to what was out there until later, maybe the fall or spring semester. I started looking for a GLBT group, and listed in the student government office, I guess they give you a list of student groups, on-campus student groups, and the Gay Student Association was listed there. And I can't remember if there was a contact number or if later I saw a notice of a meeting or something. But it was still called the Gay Student Association, and the first meeting I went to was actually at somebody's apartment. I really can't remember how I came to be at that first meeting. But there were maybe 6 or 7 of us, and they had kind of started meeting off campus, I guess. I'm not really sure if it was out of fear or just out of, getting people to participate more willingly. But they were meeting off campus on a regular basis, and I came to learn pretty quickly that it was a group that had sort of faded, it ebbed and flowed over the years since its founding in 1976, which is actually a fact I found out much later. But so we met, I guess, mostly off campus, maybe a few times on campus over the next couple of semesters or so. And I started to become friendly with some of the regulars, which were maybe 4 or 5 in total. One of whom was Debbie Berger, who wasn't at my very beginning with the group, president of the group. This guy named John was the president at the time. And I don't know his last name. I don't remember his last name, and I can't find anybody who does remember his last name. But I know that there was a president before him named Lance, again, whose last name I don't know and whom I've never met, but through other of the old regulars at the group, I found out this much, and due to my subsequent interest in the history of the group. So Debbie took over as president of the group from John, and this must have been in early '94, I guess. And that's when she introduced me to the group's faculty advisor, Dr. King Kazmerski, who has gone on to become one of my best friends and a lifelong friend and sort of a mentor in activism and so forth. So that was the first time I met Ken, and then Debbie graduated, I think, that summer, or just going into the summer, and there wasn't really anybody to take over, willing to hold meetings, and I had a feeling that it was going to be another time when the group sort of disbanded, and then I tried to imagine, it would be a lot of trouble to get the group back together and to kind of start from scratch in the fall, when the bulk of students had come back. So I somehow agreed to continue to hold meetings as sort of the de facto leader of this group. So against my will, really, I had no experience with anything like that. I just had sort of an instinct that it wouldn't be good to let the group die again. Okay, so that was the summer, and then that fall, I continued to do the same. Basically just conduct meetings. We began meeting on campus regularly. I think every Tuesday night it was. And it was primarily a social group at the time. We planned various activities, mostly off-campus activities, and otherwise we were just in discussion most of the time. There was usually a topic. We went around talking about, the travails of coming out and family issues and relationships and all the same kinds of things that I think are still being talked about by that age group now. So I guess that went on for a while, sort of kind of a loose group with not a lot of organization. Certainly there was no structure, nothing formal. And then one semester, this must have been in, I don't know, or maybe the first semester of '95, late '94, I don't remember. A guy who was checking out UCF for his doctoral studies visited the group, and he had a lot of experience with the GLBT group at the University of Florida. And in this meeting, and I think he was only there, it was just like a visitation, so he was just there for one meeting, and he gave us all these ideas about organizing, electing officers and establishing some bylaws and so forth. And then I think he, went back to U of F, in anticipation of graduating and returning to UCF. And in the meantime, we found, I guess, some original documents that nobody had known really existed before then. So I guess there was some structure, it just wasn't followed. But we dug this up and kind of rewrote it, revamped it, tweaked it to be more relative to the mid-'90s rather than the mid-'70s when it had probably originally been written. So we got a little more organized, but we continued mostly to be a discussion group and a social group. One of the things we did regularly was go out after a meeting every Tuesday night So it was, more fellowship than anything else, than anything, activism related, certainly. So I guess time went on. Greg graduated at U of F, came back to UCF to begin his postgrad studies, and that's really when the group, under his influence, really became what it has grown into now. So, I do think that if I hadn't decided to, reluctantly accept that leadership role that summer, and if the group had died as a result of that and had to start again from scratch, that it might not have been able to grow into what it eventually did. So for that, I'm proud, and I'm glad that I did that. It was a good time.
I think churches like the Unitarian Church, as well as the Unity Church and the Joy MCC Church, those are the three main congregations that are regarded, I think, within the gay community as being open and welcoming to people with different identities. And for me, it was very important to be in a congregation like that, and also being Black. The church, when I first started going there, was I think there was probably only maybe one or two other people of color who were attending at the time, but that was not a deterrent at all. I mean, I found everyone to be very open and welcoming. I felt very comfortable there. So my race certainly didn't put me off of the church. And I think for people who are living an open life, as well as maybe those who aren't living an open life, but I think for people who are living an open life, you are not willing to hide who you are, and so you're not willing to. I wasn't willing to go to a congregation like the congregations within which I grew up that had a very very judgmental attitude to those congregations. I wasn't willing to go to a congregation like that and hide who I was just to be part of the congregation. And so being able to go to a church and just be who I am, that was wonderful. And I think for gays and lesbians and bisexuals and transgendered people, that kind of congregation is just golden. And within our congregation, we've seen people of every stripe come through and been real active in the church. And even in the Unitarian Church, it does pushes buttons, but people are open to having their buttons pushed and to working through their issues. And there's no fire and brimstone and damnation that gets called up as a result. So I think a congregation like ours and the role that our congregation has played, we have not been as active within the Central Florida community as some of us would have liked to see. But we have stepped out at various times and done very public things. Like we've always participated in the gay rights, the gay parades. When I was younger, I used to march in the parades all the time. Like I remember marching in the first ones that there were downtown, and a few years ago we did a marriage equality event, and occasionally we'll do letters and we'll do different things like that. And I think in the future we'll probably become much more out there. with our activism. I think that's the way the church is going to be a little bit more forward in the community. But I think congregations like ours and Unity and Join CC, it's wonderful that we have that here in Central Florida. So, and I think in the future we'll probably become much more out there with our activism. I think that's the way the church is going to be a little bit more forward in the community. But I think congregations like ours and Unity and Join CC, it's wonderful that we have that here in Central Florida.
Well, I have kind of a funny story about. I think it sort of relates to the question, because it speaks to the composition of the church and what the church looked like. Because at the time I started going to the church, a couple times I could convince my sons to come with me, just on a couple of occasions. And at that time, and you were kind of alluding to different times throughout the years that we've belonged. Folks have come and gone, and all different stripes and colors and shapes and sizes, and at the time that I was joining, I think we had one or two transgendered folks, or folks that clearly
were going through
changes, and and that didn't go unnoticed by my sons. So when I finally came out to them and to the rest of my family, my one son asked me if the church had influenced me. And I was thinking, it's kind of unusual for the child to ask the parent if the church has influenced you to become gay. But so I reassured him that no, that wasn't the case. But that's something that we're lucky. Our kids are fully indoctrinated liberals. But not to say we didn't have some rough times and some emotional times, but I think having a place in your community that embraces all spectrums of humanity is really, really important and something to cherish and celebrate. And so the Unitarian Church, the other two churches that you mentioned, to have a spiritual home for a community that can include people that are excluded from other spiritual houses is so really important. So for that reason alone, I would continue to support the church, despite all the things that happen in the church community, especially if you serve on committees.
Okay, this I had always, even back when I was pretty young, wanted to have a family. And long before I realized that I was gay. And I came out my sophomore year in college and never really lost that desire. So even when in graduate school I met someone and was pretty serious about them and lived with them, that was an issue we talked about. In fact, Keith and I had talked about getting married. At that point, the Quaker meeting that I was attending had come to the point where they were able to marry same-sex couples on the same basis as opposite-sex couples, and we went through a process called a clearness process that Quaker meetings do. And actually, the process worked in the sense that we became clear in the fact that we weren't meant to be married to one another. And one of the big reasons for that was, as we talked with the group that we were meeting with, the clearness committee we were meeting with, about our goals for married life and such, it was real clear that one of them for me was having kids. And, given that I was pushing 30 at that point, in my mind getting very old, I wanted to do that fairly quickly. And it turned out that Keith really had decided that that wasn't something that he wanted to do. It's not the only reason we didn't get married, but it is certainly one of them. So that sort of stuck with me. I came to Orlando. I was single. I never really met anybody. I was working on getting tenure, which can be pretty busy. And on about the later 30s, I realized, okay, if I'm going to do this, particularly since at that point in my mind I was thinking adopting an infant, boy, I don't want to be the 65-year-old out trying to play catch, so I need to, fish or cut bait. I need to do this or not do this. A gal that I knew from my master's program was trying to get pregnant. She has come out and she is a lesbian. Her partner at the time wanted to have a baby, and so we tried to conceive together. And that didn't work. It turned out later that there were quite a number of medical issues. She did eventually have a kid, but only through really intensive, all kinds of interventions and fertility clinics, and in fact wanted to have a second child and couldn't. By that point, I had realized that really wasn't what I wanted to do. That the idea of fathering a child biologically wasn't what was motivating me. It was parenting a child. It was raising a child. And so I had spent that year in California. When I got back here to Orlando, this would have been in 2002. I just, I decided, I remember sitting down and telling friends, there's sort of one or two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to adopt a child, and that's going to be the focus of my life for the next 15, 20 years, or that's not going to be possible, and I'm going to go back to law school and change careers, because I was sort of at that point in my life, called a mini midlife crisis, or just wanting to do something different. And so I got a referral to an adoption agency, one that has been doing international adoptions for a long time. I realized that private adoption in the U.S. has become, quite frankly, really a money game, and a very tenuous one at that. It's through attorneys. Biological parents are expecting a lot of contact with their children, making choices. It's just a very difficult process. You have the whole difficulty of adopting in Florida as a gay person. Basically, it's not lawful, so that makes it difficult. This agency was up in Massachusetts. They had arranged an adoption for a female friend of a friend of mine, so someone who I had never met. She really liked the agency, and she did it. She was living in Virginia when this happened, and she adopted a little boy from Russia. And so I contacted them, explained that I was a single male. I did not say that I was gay. They said they had worked with a few single men, and that there were very, very few countries that would allow single men to adopt. The hierarchy is basically married couples. Many countries will also permit single women, and very few countries will permit single men to adopt. But at that time, there were a few countries that they worked with that did that. So I just started the process, and I really remember thinking, well, I'm just going to push this as quickly as I can. So everything I could FedEx, I would FedEx. If there was some paperwork that needed to be done in D.C., and you could hire somebody and FedEx paperwork to them, and they would walk it to the State Department and get it stamped, and you get quick turnaround as opposed to 3 weeks, I would do that. And so the funny thing is that actually 9 months to the day almost from when I sent my first 2-page initial application to the adoption agency in Massachusetts, I returned home with my son, who I adopted in Ukraine. So much for expecting an infant. Nikolai was almost 6 years old when I adopted him. He was 5 years, 9 months old. He was living at that point in an orphanage in southeastern Ukraine, and didn't speak any English. I, of course, didn't speak any Ukrainian. So dove right in. In terms of being gay, how did that affect the adoption process? Once during the home visits, you have a local social worker who comes and does home visits prior to adoption in the state of Florida. I was asked, we had just been talking about religion, and a lot of the home visit is actually sort of making sure you have a parent have talked about things. And the social worker kept apologizing. He said, so many of these questions are really geared towards making sure that a couple has thought about these things with one another. So the questions are sort of odd. It sounds like I'm prying, Do you have religious beliefs? Have you thought about whether you would raise your child in a religious tradition? That's not meant to say there's a right and wrong answer. It's meant to make sure that if one parent is Jewish and one is Catholic, that they've actually talked about how they're going to raise their child, and it doesn't become a huge issue in 6 months or 3 months after the adoption. So we had talked about that, and then I remember her saying, this is always one of those things imprudent in my mind, now Florida law requires me to ask, you are a heterosexual, right? And I said yes, and that is the sum total of the amount of questioning we had on that. So I lied, and I did it with malice and foresight, and I've always said, perhaps a little melodramatically, that I think that if you're Jewish and it's 1932 in Germany, you're allowed to say you're not Jewish, and I think that if you have one black ancestor out of 16 and you're living in New Orleans in 1870 and someone asks whether you're black, you're allowed to say no. You know, if there is embedded prejudice, ridiculous bigoted laws, which I believe these are, you're allowed to circumvent them, and that's what I did. You know, Rosie O'Donnell has enough money to fight this kind of stuff in court and to also adopt 4 kids along the way. I wanted to raise a family, and I think I'm a pretty good dad, so I've done that. I'm trying to think where else it might have come in. Oh, in an amusing way, something came up. You do a lot of background checks with both local, state, and national. And something came up out of the national one. I had forgotten about a little minor incident from my college days that got on a police record. Nothing that ever got a conviction. But of course, I was just convinced that that was going to, you know, just completely prevent me from being able to adopt. And so I quickly called up the agency in Massachusetts and said, oh my God, something happened, and I got to tell you about it, and I don't know what's going to mean. And they like stopped me on the phone and said, now, just understand, there's certain things you can't tell us because none of our countries work with certain issues about preferences. And I said, oh, no, here's what's happened. And I was arrested once for this, and you know, and it was charges were dropped, and they laughed and said, you know, how long ago was this? I said, oh, well, I guess it's like 23 years. And the charges were dropped, yes, and you have that record, yes. Do you understand, we have people who've spent 5 years in jail who are adoptive parents. The real question is where you are now in your life. This is not going to be a problem at all. Just write a little statement. But it was funny that they were all, it was very much a whole don't ask, don't tell situation. They knew, you know, single men don't run out and adopt because that's the easiest way to have a family. When the social worker was interviewing me, I had a house downtown Orlando, built in 1926, that was completely restored and had all sorts of antique furniture in it. And if you look around my house now, one of the things I have is some statues of male nudes of various sorts, you know, not real straight guy stuff. And they were sitting there, and I didn't do any cleaning up of the house before she was there. Just Florida law required her to ask a question. I gave the right answer that let her continue the interview, and we were done.
Florida is still very, very backwards. I keep hoping, and I can see little gradual changes happening, like having the Orange County mayoral candidate of the Republican Party show up. It's happening. It's just not happening fast enough. Sometimes I have to step back and remind myself of where we were when we first started. As a matter of fact, in 1994, when we participated in the parade in downtown Orlando, the Ku Klux Klan were there in their full garb, you know, their sheets and their hats on and all of that. So to think back to then, to the last few years of the Pride event with the parade, which the NBA took over in 2005, there have been a couple of years there have been no protesters. You know, we get 50,000 people at Lake Eola Park and no protesters. That's a huge step from where we were. It was nerve-wracking, very intimidating. I remember, and I actually had some photographs in on my desk that I brought in to show someone else or to email. I think it was to email them to Watermark, I don't remember. But somebody came to me after the event and gave me a package of pictures. My business partner and I, current business partner, still is, we carried the Metropolitan Business Association banner in that parade in '94. And when somebody took those photographs, I can't even tell you who took them now. They came to me afterwards and gave this package of pictures to me. And there are two or three very clear of us, Michelle and I, my business partner, walking with the NBA banner, and the Ku Klux Klan is right there next to us. Looking at them now, I can't say I don't still feel somewhat intimidated by it, and by there's a lot of hate groups in Florida, and the murders, for instance, of Ryan Keith Skipper in Polk County. That was a clear reminder. He was murdered much in the way of Matthew Shepard. And I always remind everybody, even though we have made great strides, don't forget to keep your guard up. You must keep your guard up. So you see, I'm much more confident. Well, I just turned 50 years old myself. So I know who I am. I've known who I am for a long time, and that's not going to change. But the Ku Klux Klan and the hate groups, really now I feel sorry for them more than anything. Because I can't understand that kind of hatred. And I can't understand, well, obviously some of them have evolved. Or they don't go out in their sheets anymore. I mean, isn't that laughable? I mean, I can relate now to, I think that what it really helped me to understand was the civil rights movement and what the black community went through, on a much, much smaller scale. It's much more, it's easy for us, a lot easier for a lot of us to be unknown. People don't know who we are. Well, with the black community, they didn't have that benefit. So my admiration for that civil rights movement has grown each and every day. And now when I see what's going on with the challenge of the 14th Amendment, it just is another reminder. Yes, we've made progress, but there are people in this country that hate, and they're teaching their children to hate. And we can't lose sight of that we must continue, and that was another part of Come Out with Pride, with bringing the students and the professionals and the business owners together, so that the young people would all blend together and everyone could support one another, and the young people can then take up the torch.
1987, the center was located at their first physical facility, which is just a block north of where we're at right now. 1040 North Mills Avenue was the building that was our first physical building. And Michael Wanzi, who's a very important activist and founder of the modern gay community here in Central Florida, was doing a rally at one of the city parks, and I was just divorced and had not come out of the closet yet, but I had heard about the rally they were doing in protest of police entrapment at the park. So I rode down there on my bicycle, and I had big sunglasses and a big old hat. And after the rally, he walked out, and it seemed like he was zeroed right in on me. He came up and introduced himself and thanked me for coming, and had mentioned that the center was holding a picnic later on. It was a Saturday, and they were going to have a barbecue at the center later that day. So on the way to a catering job that evening, I stopped by and walked in the door and realized I didn't catch on fire, and that really started my process. After a couple of weeks, I became a volunteer here at the Gay Community Center, and after a year or so, I became a volunteer coordinator, and then a few years later became a board member and was an officer for many years. And then in 1998, the center was in a little bit of a rough patch. Had some financial situations a few years before. I made the decision to leave the city of Orlando after 13 years and take over as the executive director here at the center, and was here for 2 years and paid off the debt and purchased the building we're in now, which is the actual fourth physical building that the center has been in. But now we own this one, or we're buying it still, and from there went to work with my husband with our company, which is gaydays.com, Gay Days Incorporated. He had purchased the domain name, I believe it's about 12, 13 years ago, and had just helped on the sidelines as I was still working with the city and working here in different areas. But then in, I think it was 2002, I left the Make-A-Wish Foundation and went full-time with our company, and it's been very interesting to see the evolution of the event from just being a volunteer that first year. Both of us, we had just met actually the September before in 1989, and then in 1990 getting involved as volunteers, helping spread the word through the center and other methods here in Central Florida to what it's become today, one of the top international gay and lesbian vacation events in the world. I guess the first year, a grassroots effort, which was really just a local effort. I believe we might have had some people out of the Central Florida area attend if they were in town, but it was really just broadcast locally to get people out to the Magic Kingdom on that first Saturday. And from that evolution, I think with the growth of the internet and the power that that does to really get news worldwide in seconds or less than seconds, I guess, has helped spread the word. Growing from, after a few years, being more of maybe a statewide Atlanta on down to spreading to being many people from the East Coast. And then over the last 10 years, we do national advertising, we do national and now international travels to have a booth at other events to promote. We actually just returned 2 days ago from San Diego Pride and had a booth there for the 2 days of their Pride to promote it. This was our second year doing an overseas trip. Last year we did Manchester Pride, bringing all those euros over to spend in Central Florida, as well as this year, just a month ago, we were in Antwerp, Belgium, at their Pride promoting Gay Days. So, as I've mentioned, Out Traveler magazine voted Gay Days the third best international gay and lesbian vacation event a few years ago. And I think a lot of that has been because unless you're a gambler, Orlando's the #1 tourist destination for the world as a whole. Las Vegas if you're a gambler. So we have that core magic that's already here, all the attractions, the beautiful beaches nearby, this beautiful weather, if you like heat and humidity. So it's made it easier, but I think the efforts, all of us, our staff and friends and all the organizations that are involved with Gay Days each year, they help spread the word.
My partner and I got married at Lake Eola as a public witness for marriage equality. We had 3 couples, 2 lesbian couples and 1 gay male couple who got married publicly in the park. And then we had about probably 20 to 25 other couples, both gay and straight, who renewed their vows. And we did this as a public witness for marriage equality, and it was well supported and attended by the church. The whole community just kind of came together and did this, and that was about 6 years ago. That's probably the biggest thing I was involved in there. But it was actually a very scary step in some ways for me because I had just stopped working at Special Beginnings and just started working at the practice I was in. So I knew this would be very public, and it was on TV all over the place. And I wasn't sure how the physicians that I was working with now would take this, if they would be supportive or not. So it was a little bit of a risk for me as far as career-wise, to put myself out there in the public. But if they saw the newscasts, nobody had any issue with it, and they've been very supportive. They offer domestic partner insurance. They've invited my partner to come to all the office parties and get-togethers, and they've been very accepting of her. So as it turned out, it was fine, but it was kind of nerve-wracking at the time because it was. I think we got married on Friday, and I started working for them on Monday. So it was like that close together. But it felt good to be out there, doing something publicly, even though it was scary and a little nervous. But the support that we got from the church community was just tremendous. People just came out of the woodwork to drive us, to provide music, to have a reception afterwards. We felt very loved and supported by that whole community, both gay and straight.
The way people would know me the best would be from Out and About Books, which was the gay and lesbian bookstore. We opened in May of '92, and that's when I actually first moved up here a little earlier in '92. Out and About Books opened in May of 1992, and We closed in 2001. The actual date was supposed to be January 31st, 2001, but I hung on a little bit after that because of some unfinished business. Well, with the bookstore, I was pretty much involved with almost all of the gay and lesbian organizations, everything from PFLAG to the GLBCC, which was known as different things during different times, GLCS, GLBTT, all kinds of other alphabet initials. The softball league, the tennis league, although I didn't play tennis, so supported all the groups. Whenever anybody came to me, they were having, a fundraiser, an event, or whatever, I usually try to give them some sort of something to help out with it. And MBA, I was part of the MBA for a long time. And I'm sure there's lots and lots of others. I know there's lots of others, but I can't think of them all at the moment. With MBA, I was on the board of directors for a year or two during the early years of the MBA. I can't think of any others. I mean, there's all kinds. I mean, there were, like the AIDS organizations like Centaur and Hope and Help, AIDS Resource Alliance, the Love Foundation, all kinds of them. And sports groups, they had bowling leagues and tennis group and softball and just all kinds of, any area of interest, for anyone. There's usually some corresponding group for the gay and lesbian community. So I was pretty involved with all of them.